Welcome to Lamore's Cards. I'm Matthew, and this is another episode of Learn to Play, where I have experienced members of the community come on to teach you about one of their decks. If you enjoy this video, consider liking, commenting, subscribing, or supporting me on Patreon like these amazing patrons did, so I can make more of these and make them better for you, as well as get access to perks like early videos and getting in games with me. With all that being said, let's pass it over to this episode's guest.
Hello everyone, my name is Dylan. I am from the cEDH YouTube channel Play to Win. We make weekly cEDH content, mainly gameplay, sometimes deck techs, and today I think we're going to be talking about Yuriko. So my list is called Yuriko Tempo to Win. It's pretty similar to the database list, but has some differences. The main strategy that I'm trying to go for is to get out some evasive flyers, ideally ninjas, out in the early turns of the game, and then use Yuriko as a card advantage source throughout the rest of the game. The strategy can be pretty good because it doesn't involve casting a lot of spells. Yuriko can come in without being cast, which is pretty neat against rule of law effects like that. And there's a lot of value to be gained in blue-black. You're in Thassa's Oracle, colors, so you can play Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pack. Normally, you would probably be playing Ad Nauseam in a blue-black deck, but in this particular list, Yuriko is actually looking to have a lot of high mana cost spells. One, because one of our main win conditions is actually just like Yuriko damage, getting everyone dead with flipping big Seagate restorations and temporal trespasses off the top. So Ad Nauseam is not so good there. And also we just have such a powerful draw engine in the command zone. So the Ad Nauseam is needed a little bit less. Plus we're kind of revolving around the strategy that we're not trying to go first, we're trying to hit second. So we're trying to go right after the fastest player. And once everyone spent their resources trying to stop that player, in my experience, that is the best time for Yuriko to strike. So our main win conditions are honestly just combat damage and Yuriko damage, flipping big things off the top, using tutors to put them there. And then also Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consultation, or Tainted Pact is pretty helpful. We can use cards like Doomsday to set that up, with Yuriko being able to crack your Doomsday pile, using cards like Street Wraith and some other things to assemble a small amount of cards in your library when you cast Thassa's Oracle. And then the other win condition is one that's used less often, but if all the stars align and your opponents have a Dockside in play and you have a Sakashima Student in hand, as long as there are 5 or more artifacts and enchantments on the field, you can ninjutsu in your Sakashima Student as a copy of somebody else's Dockside. And then if you have another ninjutsu, you can ninjutsu it back into your hand and ninjutsu again and back and forth, creating infinite Dockside triggers, creating infinite treasures. And then if there is an outlet on the table, something like a Thrasios or Kenrith, you can use that to win the game. So as far as speed, this is not the fastest deck in the format. There certainly are dream situations where you could win on turn 2, but that's not going to happen often. As far as fast mana goes, this deck normally plays a surprisingly low amount of fast mana. A lot of lists even opting to not play things like Mana Crypt. I personally am playing Soul Ring and Mana Crypt because I think no matter what, they're going to be good cards. But besides Chromox, Lotus Petal, Mox Amber, and Mox Diamond, there's no other ramp in the deck basically. So you're really not trying to turbo out your turns. You're really trying to set up early card advantage, hang out on free interaction, which this deck can play a ton of. Since you're not playing Ad Nauseam, you don't have to fear about playing things like Misdirection and Submerge and even Gush as ways to draw cards for free, hoping to hit more of that free interaction. I often think of this deck almost like a Thrasios deck in a strange way. They're looking to set up their card advantage, set up their Thrasios, and then just chill on that, chill on their value pieces, counter the spells that are relevant, and then wait until their opponents are depleted from resources, and then that's normally the time to strike. I would say if we can win between turn 4 and 6, which is a pretty average turn for cEDH decks to win, that's normally when we're trying to start looking for ways to win. Normally, I would say it probably leans closer towards 6 or 7, but I would say around turn 4 is when we're looking to start really turning the corner. Ideally, in my opinion, what I'm looking for is a turn 1 evasive creature, turn 2 Yuriko attack. At this point, you also ideally would love some free interaction. Since you're spending all of your mana on turn 1 and 2, you need something like a Fierce Guardianship, Force of Negation, Force of Will, or some other free counter magic that you could be playing so that you are not completely dead on your first 2 turns of the game, because these are some of the big turns of cEDH when a lot of things are decided. So you still have to be able to do something there. And then on turn 3, a lot of the times you're just getting out one little ninja and then maybe holding up some mana. Turn 4, you get another ninja, hold up some mana. Ideally, you can use things like Skull Snatcher or Dothi's Voidwalker or Opposition Agent or some of your creatures that can also hinder what your opponents are doing and slowing them down. But from turns 2, 3, 4, and 5, I say your main goal is to just establish your draw engines with Yuriko, get as many ninjas as you can in play, and sort of police the table, if you will. And then on turn 5 or 6, ideally go for a Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation win with backup. Some mistakes that you might make while playing Yuriko is if you're playing it like a regular Dimir Thassa's Oracle Consultation deck, it's just not going to get you there. It doesn't have the fast mana to pull off some of those explosive starts. What you're really looking for is that consistency. You want turn 1 evasive creature, turn 2 Yuriko. If your hand doesn't have that, you basically mulligan as long as you can until like mulligan 4 or something like that. All you need is 2 lands, evasive creature, and counter magic. That's 4 cards, and you should be able to find that in some number of mulligans in the beginning of the game. One of the misconceptions that I may see about this deck is that it's a Doomsday deck, since it's playing Doomsday and there's a pretty efficient Doomsday pile. And although that is true, Doomsday is an option. Again, I stress a lot of the times Doomsday just isn't necessary. If you need to get the win out earlier than you would normally feel comfortable for one reason or another, it's a fine option. But realistically, the best way to win with this deck that I found is to just keep on attacking, keep on flipping things off the top, and stay alive as long as possible. A trap that some Yuriko deck builders will fall into is putting too many ninja synergies and too many big things in their library and hoping to flip them off the top. I wouldn't say that you have to go over the top. What's important is that your deck is full of good spells. At the end of the day, the only way that you win the game is by casting good, efficient spells, and there is a way to balance that while still making sure that your Yuriko can hit big targets and put pressure on your opponents. One of the biggest strengths of Yuriko, I think in my opinion, is that it can put early pressure on ad nauseum decks without necessarily specifically targeting them. So that's really good, but you don't have to put every 15 drop that you can in your Yuriko deck. At the end of the day, this Yuriko deck is a tempo deck, which means it falls somewhere between aggro and control. You have to know when to pivot, which is a concept that is a little bit difficult to fully grasp and even explain in cEDH. But basically, you have to know when it's time to no longer control your opponents and saying, I'm going to try to win the game instead. You really only have a brief window to do that, and why this deck is a tempo deck is it plays to that window. It's not playing to go until a million years from now. It doesn't want to play until turn 15. It just wants to open up a window just big enough so it can let in a win. So that tempo is really, really important in Yuriko. And I think you really get a feel for that the more that you play this deck. So as far as mulligans, if you remember what I was talking about earlier, as far as what we're looking for in the first 1 and 2 turns of the play, the mulligan decision tree is pretty easy. The first question is, do you have an evasive flyer? And then do you have 2 mana over the course of 2 turns? And then do you have some free interaction? As long as you have those things, I would say in probably any of your first 3 or 4 hands, I think that's a keep. Bonus points if you have a tutor or something like that, so that you can begin looking for either other interaction. If you mystical tutor for a counterspell and scare your opponents from doing things, that might be a really good play. Or if you just look for a demonic consultation and scare them that way, that could be an option too. Nonetheless, I would say the main thing that you're looking for in mulligans are land, evasive flyer, free counter magic, that's 4 cards, tutor would be 5th cards, and then for your 6th and 7th card, something like a Dothi Voidworker or an opposition agent or a permanent that is affecting the board, and then like another ninja or something like that. All right, so this one is, I think, a pretty solid one. You have Matha's Changeling, which is one of those evasive flyers. It happens to be a changeling, so it's a ninja. That's what we were talking about. You have at least 2 mana sources, 3 here, which is great. You even have a Mystic Remora, and realistically, this is probably one of the few situations that you may deviate from your regular plan and just play a turn 1 Mystic Remora. It depends, though. If you are turn 1 in turn order, I think definitely. If you are last in turn order, or maybe like even 3rd in turn order, I think it might be right to play a turn 3 Mystic Remora and just hold it into the late game and still continue on with your plan. And Diabolic Intent, our tutor, is also great. We can sacrifice that Matha's Changeling later on when we're ready to pivot if we want to win the game. So I would keep this hand probably against any pod in any turn order, and just how I would play it would depend on what turn order I'm in and what the pod is. This one's close. There are 4 lands, technically 5 with the Agadeem's Awakening. You have Phyrexian Walker and Hope of Girper, so that you can kind of guarantee Yuriko hitting on turn 2, which is kind of a strategy. I did also mention that having like free interaction or like maybe like a tutor or something is also helpful. On a 7, I probably wouldn't keep this. On a second 7, I may not keep this, but on a 6, I probably would keep this hand because we do have evasive creature and lands to play, so it probably will unfold okay. But if we're in like a lot of turbo decks at our pod, or we're early like on a first 7 or second 7, or maybe even a 6, I would probably risk it and keep going further. So as a mulligan to 5, this one is pretty good. At a 7, this is awesome. This is 3 lands, 3 creatures. 2 of them are evasive, 2 of them are ninjas, and the Mindbreak Trap. This is great. This is definitely keep. This is a keep at basically any level, I think. At a 5, I think you keep Underground Sea, Mana Confluence, and then if you see that you're at a table with a lot of green decks and 4th Bridge Prowler can get rid of a Mana Dork, maybe you keep that one. But if you are not, maybe you keep the 2 other creatures, Changeling Outcast and Fairy Seer, and then the Mindbreak Trap. So maybe land, 2 creatures and a Mindbreak Trap is what I would keep. And then yeah, this one's great. You either start on Fairy Seer if no one has played a Mana Dork, or if someone has played a Birds of Paradise, you probably start with the 4th Bridge Prowler and then just go on your Yuriko plan. So I think Yuriko thrives best when you're at a balanced pod, ideally one with more mid-range than not mid-range. If you're at a pod full of turbo decks, Yuriko is going to fall a little bit short since you have to kind of tap out on turn 1 or 2 and hope that you have free interaction. Normally Yuriko wants to make sure that it's comfortably alive on turn 3. So if you're in a pod with a Stacks deck and a couple mid-range decks, Yuriko is going to do really, really great. Also, if you're on the other end of the spectrum and you're playing against 3 Stacks decks, Yuriko might find a little bit of a harder time there because some of the snowballing that something like Winota can do can get a little bit out of hand for Yuriko to handle. That being said, having efficient win cons like Thassa's Oracle's Mana Consultation make those matchups a little bit better. So I truly do think, in my opinion, Yuriko's like biggest fear is like a pod full of Turbo Naz decks. But really, one of the greatest things about Yuriko is it can kind of play into any pod or any meta and be okay. Since your plan isn't that egregious, like you're not doing something that horrific in the early turns of the game, it's hard for your opponents to justify pinging your creatures. Like they don't want to kill a Changeling Outcast when there's like a collector oof down the line that could be causing them more problems. So they're not going to waste a lot of their removal on your things. And then before they know it, you have 10 cards in hand and they've already taken 15 from your hits off of Yuriko. So those are the pods that you want to play in kind of like really any pod, any balanced pod. Where you'll find issues if you find yourself in an all turbo pod or an all stacks pod. And those pods can kind of be difficult to navigate for a lot of decks, I think. Closing thoughts are, after doing this deck tech, I really want to put Yuriko back together because I took it apart a little while ago, and now that I'm talking about it so much, the deck is really so cool. I think it's a great bridging deck from Commander to cEDH. If you're typically a regular Commander player or even like a modern player or something like that and wanting to try one of your first decks in cEDH, I think this deck is really a great one because it helps you learn the speed of the format, it helps you learn what other decks are trying to do, and it kind of allows you to just like do your little thing. You get to play your little ninjas and develop your engines, and it can move really quickly and get way out of hand really fast and go way over the top. But you're playing a lot of fair cards, a lot of fair strategies. But I think it's a pretty unique deck, and in many ways feels like other tempo decks from other formats like Delver of Secrets and decks like that, where you're just trying to protect your advantage pieces and just play a little bit of Magic and out tempo your opponents. So yeah, the deck is a blast, super fun to play. You get to play a lot of unique cards. Highly recommend it.